Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned today, and I am stoked for this one. We're going to be talking wildfires, and while I'm excited, y'all should be too. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bells, do all that good stuff, get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. I cannot wait to get this started. We tried to get this started last year. It was during fire season, was not the best planning on my part. So now that we're not quite in fire season yet, we're going to get this going. So I want to give you guys quick 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you, where you come from, all that good stuff. We're going to start up on top. Ben.
Hey, my name is Ben Strahan. I'm the superintendent of the Eldorado Hotshots here in Northern California. I've been a wildland firefighter this is my 25th fire season going into.
Bam. So just a touch of experience, just a little bit. Evan, how about yourself?
Yeah, Evan Stewart, Assistant Deputy Chief for Red Deer Emergency Services, a municipal fire service in Alberta, and wildland urban interface specialist for the province of Alberta and British Columbia. And yeah, not as many years under my hat as Ben, but a little over a decade for firefighting for me.
Bam. Another just a newbie. He's just starting out. Rob, how about yourself?
Yeah, Rob Redekopp. I was a private investigator for 25 years, certified cause and origin wildfire investigator for the province of Alberta, and now I'm an independent adjuster. So I do all kinds of stuff now.
Bam. I like it. Sean, how's Mount treating you?
Good. Sorry, my camera dropped out there for a sec. Looking forward to the conversation. This has been planned for how long now, Chance? It feels like it's been
6 months,
7 months, something like that.
Yep.
We started talking about it loosely prior to the fires that started kicking off last year. And then everyone got super busy, of course, fighting fires and serving the public. And so once that phase went through, it's taken us this long to line up these fantastic guests. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, been looking forward for quite a while.
Yeah, we actually, interestingly enough, we had started discussing this just before the Jasper fire started. And then we were like, yeah, we should get this set up. Shouldn't be that much of a, it's been pretty quiet here. Maybe we can get something sorted. And then just like, gone. Everyone was gone. So let's get this kicked off. And I forgot to mention earlier, but if anybody watching has any questions, comments, anything at all, put them in the comment section. We can hit those throughout the show. I want to get your guys' first thoughts just in general. When I sent you the email with the topic and all that stuff, what were your first thoughts when you heard wildfire? Ben, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important topic, especially with what's been going on here in Southern California. I think it's a huge topic of discussion all the time, where we're, at least in the United States, we're moving from what we call fire season to fire years. So we're getting, we're having fires all over, all times during the year. Even we used to call it fire season. So as soon as that ends, we got fires in, back east, or we got them in Southern California, and people can see what's happening. They're getting more destructive. So it's a important conversation to be having.
Yeah, could not agree more. Evan, what was your first thoughts?
Yeah, obviously topic close to my heart. Wildland firefighting is taking up the vast majority of my time when it comes to our fire seasons here in Alberta and in British Columbia. And they're getting more and more severe and impactful for us here, right? Like, we're not far off from Ben and his team down in California. When you talk about fire seasons are getting longer and longer, they're starting earlier every year. They're lasting longer into the fall. We got more and more people building homes and building communities in the interface, so it's impacting more and more people every year. And it's starting to really impact communities that aren't in the interface too, when they're supporting evacuations and supporting evacuees for long durations of time. You saw down in California recently, most costly disaster in their history, pretty much here with the recent fires around LA. Canada's no different. Wildfires are exceeding all other types of losses in our country here now for dollar value at the end of the day, year over year. So good topic of discussion for sure.
Yeah. Rob, what are you thinking?
I always, now I think of the rebuild side, if people are insured properly, claims, how that looks, how it affects masses amounts of people. And like I was telling you yesterday, Chance, I just slowed down from last year. So I have time for this, right?
I can imagine the amount of paperwork that needs to be done after a massive fire like Jasper. That's just ridiculous. My hand hurts thinking about it. Sean, what were your first thoughts?
So first thoughts are just based on what I've heard from the guests right now. So first thing first, I scribbled down, it's a huge point of discussion in Southern California, the fires that are going on right now or have been going on. Interestingly enough, though, I flew down to Southern California in January to hang out with one of my old Tier 1 buddies and spent a week down there. It was in Irvine, California, where he lives. Now, I got to say, you couldn't smell any smoke. You didn't see any ash. You had no indication that there was fires just like literally kind of the day before. And so if not for the news, or more correctly, if not for paying attention to the news, I never would have known there was a fire in Southern California as it was actually still burning. And that was the case for people all around me. They just didn't seem concerned because you couldn't smell it, you couldn't taste it, you couldn't hear it, you couldn't see it. No one was really talking about it that much. And so that was just like a little further south than the fires, like not quite stone's throwing distance, but right in the footprint. But it was a non-factor because it wasn't impacting the people in that particular part of Irvine. And so that's what I find interesting about fires is the time it becomes like a big deal is when it's heating up your feet. And so no one really pays that much attention to it until it's really time to pay attention to it because it's impacting you in the moment. And on the insurance piece for Rob, this morning, coincidentally, I was just flicking through the news and I saw, I believe, I could be wrong, but I think California, the insurance companies, as of just kind of now, are trying to increase insurance by 22% or 20 and a bit percent to offset for the fires or to take into account the upcoming fire seasons that will only continue to get worse as the years unfold. And so I'm curious, what's the thoughts on Southern California? It's a big deal if you're in it, but it's not a big deal if you're 7 miles away. And then also on the insurance piece, what's the thoughts on that?
Let's start with Rob. What do you got?
Well, I guess what people don't kind of take into account is, every year on your renewal for your insurance, insurance companies, they don't typically, they'll renew your policy based on like inflation and that kind of thing, but they don't actually look at, if a catastrophic event, and I'm just speaking, in relation to Jasper, right? Catastrophic event. Okay, now we have, half the town burnt, whatever. And it's not until, you get into the guts of the thing, because there's several pieces to it. There's the total loss piece where people have lost their homes and now they don't have a place to live, right? And then there's the other piece where, your home wasn't affected, but you still are. So there's, additional living expenses and all that kind of comes into that. So everybody who wasn't affected by the fire in Jasper were affected because they were evacuated and under evacuation order. An insurance company actually has your policy changes, right? And so then there's specific things that they'll pay out. There's requirements around it. And then, once these people kind of get back into their community, because, emergency services are restoring power and sewage and all that stuff, so that people can actually live there again. And then you get back into the community and you're like, if your house wasn't damaged by the fire, and there's still smoke damage and all that stuff. I'm kind of jumping all over the place because there's a lot of stuff going through my brain, right? But you still have ALE expenses, right? Because you may get home and like I walked through a house with a lady and it's, pristine on the outside. You get inside and it's soot and smoke damage everywhere, right? So now you're looking at contents, and fridges and freezers are rotten because everybody gets a new fridge and freezer because you don't even want to open those things up because it's a biohazard, right? But then now kind of we tail off on that and we get into the rebuild piece. And then we find out that people are underinsured by at least 2 times, right? There is, because it's an isolated community, there is, you have to ship everything in, right? So there's all the supplies that you have to get to that there. There's still, you have to deal with the displacement of these individuals and where you're going to put them, because they don't want to be living away from their community. They want to be back in their where their home is, even though their home's burnt to the ground. So you're dealing with that, and then you're dealing with, on top of that, you're dealing with labor shortage. So how are you going to get 45 homes built back up again in like a year, let's say, right? And then if you're in a national park, well, now you have, compliance issues with building, and you have to have a certain type of roof, and you have to, there's all these different components to it. So each community gives a different kind of problem. And, I know that the insurance is similar, but it's very different in the United States. Every state has a different, insurance act and laws type of thing. But it doesn't surprise me that, the insurance companies are doing this, because you look at a main insurer, like let's say Intact here in Canada, which is the largest insurance company. Most people have, about 23% of the population has an Intact for their insurance, and they have subsidiaries like Bel Air Direct and all this stuff. But they have the ability to pay claims and spread that loss out over their policyholders, where you have these smaller boutique insurance companies that can't necessarily put the money towards, like, throw money at it, because they're looking at retention and spreading that cost over the policyholders, so they don't want a big jump in premiums, right? So for California to do that, it burns every year. But I don't know, insurance company, it's about money, right? So that's ultimately what it comes down to.
That it is. Now, it sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare in terms of the rebuilding phase and trying to get that sorted out. I can't even imagine. Ben, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because I used to live in California, and let's see here, since basically 2017, when we started having this new terminology called mega fires. Like these, when I first started my career in 2001, a 20,000 acre fire was a big fire. And then all of a sudden we're slowly progressing into larger and larger and larger fires. It wasn't uncommon. It still isn't uncommon to get a 100,000 acre fire. And in 2020, when I got the superintendent's job of this crew, we had a 1 million acre fire in Northern California, which is just insane, right? And big lightning complex comes through and starts a bunch of little fires that all grew together. So after that happened, or during that time, the state was actually insurance companies were dropping people off their plans because they couldn't insure folks anymore. It was just too costly. And so everybody got we had one option for an insurance policy, which was called the California Fair Plan. So I might have been paying $1,000 a year roughly to insure my home for wildland fire. And then that is slowly increased up to like $6,000, $8,000 and things of this nature. So it became incredibly difficult for people to live in rural communities just based on the change in policies. So, and then just to comment on, what Sean was talking about, the like you're not smelling the smoke. I think that's what's really important about this particular podcast right now, this discussion and discussions that are like this. It's a lot of this is about awareness, bringing the awareness to people, because it is very easy to find yourself kind of in this complacent area where, because it's not affecting you, you don't really have this solid grasp on the fact that it could happen to you. And especially in California, where, fire is such a big part of the ecosystem and always has been, that, it's hard to see like, okay, what about my property, or what about this landscape needs to be treated in a way to protect my home in the best way. And so conversations like this are just getting increasingly more important to have, to talk about, what an individual can do to protect their land, and also how to increase, the fire ecology in a way that we're including healthy amounts of fire on the ground pre-incident. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on some of that.
I love it. It's interesting. I remember hearing this last fire season where here in town in Edmonton, people wouldn't complain about they'd see it on the news and they'd be like, oh, there's fire, it's so bad, until the smoke was over top of the city. And then it was, oh, why aren't people doing anything about this? It needs to be dealt with. And it kind of blew my mind that people didn't realize that these things are still happening. It's just the fact that the smoke's in your face, now you're worried about it, blows me away. Evan, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, tons. Just relating a lot of what I heard from Ben and Rob to what I know here in Alberta and in BC, right, is I think the awareness piece is that I think folks think that as much as insurance is different in the States than it is in Canada, I've been on a lot of fires where a house on one side of the road, because a municipal boundary ends, is insured, where on the other side of the road, it's, astronomical amounts of insurance because there's no fire coverage and they're uninsured. And this person loses their home and it's covered by their insurance company. This person across the street that was neighbors with them loses their home and they're completely uninsured because they couldn't afford $15,000 a year for insurance in British Columbia, right? And that happens a lot. Even here in Canada. And I think the awareness piece on the pre-impingement to communities and pre-impingement on people's homes is that our fire seasons are getting longer. They're getting more and more complex. They're getting more and more intense. If you're living in the urban interface, which is anywhere near a forest, you need to be considering what your insurance looks like. You need to get into the depths of your policy. You need to know if you're with one of these big companies that'll be able to weather the storm or not. You need to be considering things like fire smart structures. You need to be considering things, or I think it's FireWise down in California, but prepping your property, and that's vegetation management, making sure you got no combustible material within 1.5 meters of your home. Trees are thinned and pruned out away from your structure. You got non-combustible siding, non-combustible roof. Those small things you can do as a homeowner, I can say 100% make all the difference. I'm not talking about when we get major conflagrations that impact a community and we get into structure to structure ignition. That's a totally different topic. But the vast majority of structures that are lost in a wildfire impingement on a community or even in a rural area are from what's called ember showers. They're from burning material that's flying through the air, and then they're igniting a piece of burnable fuel, whether that's a juniper bush or a welcome mat you left right up against your door on your house, and then that burns and extends to the property, and the home becomes a loss or damage, right? In Alberta, I go back to where we had our first catastrophic impact, would have been 2011 for us here in Slave Lake, where we had a major fire impact that significantly impacted the community of Slave Lake. And that was the first wake-up call for Alberta, the Alberta Fire Service, Alberta Wildland Fire Service, and it didn't stop. right? We had a bit of a reprieve there. We still had fire seasons in between, but we rolled right into, the Fort McMurray wildfire in 2016, where we evacuated a city of 88,000 people. There was loss of life during that evacuation from car accidents in the chaos and in the panic. 2,000 structures lost in the city of Fort McMurray. That was huge. Canada's most costly natural disaster, still to this day, when you factor in insured losses. And then, rolling right through and get into 2017 in British Columbia, where we had, BC's largest ever recorded wildfire. Ben's talking about million-acre fires. We had the Plateau Fire in BC. It was 2.2 million acres, right? About 600,000 hectares. That Plateau Fire was 2 complexes started by lightning that all burned together in one day. The fire did a 40-kilometer run from where it was that morning to where it was the next morning. In a 24-hour period, it moved 40 kilometers on the map. And that was something that, I had never seen before. That was crazy, right? We were used to 8-10 kilometer runs in extreme conditions, but to see a fire move 40K in a 24-hour period was absolute insanity. Watching it, roll forward to 2019, we had the Chuckade Creek fire up in High Level. And now you're talking about evacuating a community of a couple of thousand people, but the closest community that can host them is 6 hours away. So people are evacuating, and they're evacuating 6 hours to another community. And that fire, again, another 2 million acre fire, it jumped the Peace River, where the Peace River was a kilometer wide. Like it wasn't even there. I watched it. It was burning up to the river, and it just kept going. So a kilometer wide water feature didn't do anything to stop the fire because of those ember generating fuel types, and the fire hopping 2 to 4 kilometers in front of itself in 70, 80 kilometer winds that were generated by the fire weather. They weren't even sustained winds from weather features. It was simply the fire weather itself generating 70 to 80 kilometer hour winds in front of the fire. 2021 lost the community of Lytton in BC, total loss. 2023 lost Enterprise in the Northwest Territories. We lost the community of Fox Lake in Northern Alberta, and thousands of other structures in the 70 plus out of control wildfires that were all burning at the same time. It's happening, and it's going to continue to happen. There's nothing we can do to stop the fire seasons from continuing to get more and more intense and longer every year. So people need to know that it's a difficult thing. We need to be more prepared for. We need to be more resilient as a population.
Yeah, this is blowing me away. And the fact is, I think a lot of people also, they hear these numbers on the news, right? 60,000 hectares. Most people don't know what a hectare is, right? They don't know the size of an acre. They don't understand the sheer scale of the numbers that you're talking about. Because especially here in Canada, when you see a news report and there's a chopper flying by and you see that the fire burning in the mountains, and you're like, wow, there's no scale to it. They're just like, that's a big fire. But they don't actually understand that is their entire city in flames right now.
Yeah.
Just in scale. It's
simple, right? Like, yeah, we use hectares up here in Canada, but a simple way to think about that is a 1,000 hectare fire is, hectares 100 meters by 100 meters. So, a 100 hectare fire is a kilometer long, right? And, put that anywhere on the map. And these big fires are a problem for sure. They resource strap us. We can only work on certain portions of it at a time. So we're looking at areas that we can say, hey, there's tolerable growth on this flank. We can let it go for a while, but this side, we got to put everybody on it. But you can have a small fire in the wrong place and still evacuate thousands of people, right? It doesn't need to be a big fire to be an issue. You can have a couple 100 hectare fire right up against a community, and you're still talking about major loss and major evacuation. So size doesn't always mean complexity, but obviously these big fires end up strapping all of our resources pretty quick.
Man, it's really catching in my head the amount of logistics that goes into this. And I can say for myself, I'd never even imagined the amount of logistics in just managing the fire, let alone putting the fire out. And then on top of that, trying to manage the post regrowth and rebuilding and all this other stuff. This is insane. Sean, you got any thoughts?
I do. You know what? I kind of misspoke right at the start of the show. I said, I don't know really much about fires, use matches, use lighter, etc. But that's kind of a bit of a lie, I suppose. And I kind of forgot. This is dumb. So I was in my last year of high school in Grand Cache, Alberta. So this is like 1981, 82. And we had a frickin' cronkin' big bunch of fires going up in northern Alberta. So forestry came into town and kind of press ganged as many men as possible into joining firefighting teams. And they kind of loosely said, like, you either get on the team or you go to jail. And so that's a whole different story that I could spool up for another 30 minutes. But in essence, this is what happened. Was I joined a small team of like 21 men, and we flew up to northern Alberta, got off of the DC-3. There was a janky old Sikorsky helicopter that was waiting for us. We got in that. We flew somewhere. I still don't know where. We landed somewhere, wherever that was. And then we got off, and the pilot said, I'll see you in the morning at 0600 when we start fighting fires. I was like, wow. And so for 3 weeks, 21 days, we fought fires nonstop from 6 in the morning until 6 at night. And the helicopter would land, pick us up, fly us somewhere, drop us off, and say, see you at the end of the day right there. And we'd be out there fighting fires for 12 hours. Now, here's the best part. Here's what we were issued. Orange coveralls and your choice of an axe, a shovel, or a chainsaw. By the way, there's some hoses. Go find water and start fighting fires. And so for comms, it was this. Hey, come and help me. Because we didn't have freaking radios. The only radios we had was the team boss, the team leader. And apparently, quote unquote, his radio could contact the helicopter in case of an emergency. That never ever worked for us. So if you can imagine 21 days in the middle of whereversville with barely any resources and fighting fires. And none of us were formally trained. None of us were formally trained. And so I did that for 2 rotations. So I was out for 6 weeks in northern Alberta. And by the way, living conditions where you brought your tent and your favorite sleeping bag. And if you didn't have a good sleeping bag, guess what? Your sleep sucked for 21 nights. And then you did it better the next rotation. You got no support and you had to figure it all out yourself, essentially, which is way different than now. But it's not the distinction between back in the day and now that I'm making. The distinction I'd like to make is this. If I hadn't have done those 2 rotations as a kid and felt that adversity, and by the way, I've done some pretty dirty jobs in my life through my careers, but possibly the filthiest job I've ever had in my life was fighting fires for 21 days at a time. I'd be in my gaunch, or my underwear. That's a Canadian term, gaunch, ginch. I'd be in my gaunch, my hiking boots, and an orange coverall, and that was it. And every single day, you just got dirtier because we had no showers. We had no water nearby. You just got a filthier and filthier sleeping bag. And so the conditions sucked. The food sucked. Our cook had just got out of jail the day before and volunteered to be the cook. And like he nearly poisoned the entire camp one night, which again is an entirely different story. All of that. Imagine this. There I am, about halfway through my first tour, and I'm standing on a ridge with my arms folded with an axe hanging underneath my arm. I'm looking across at, I figure maybe 2 to 3 kilometers away, watching a fire jump up a ridge at warp factor 3. And I thought, wow, I've spent the last 10 years of my life living in the bush in Alberta, and I've never seen anything like this. How is it moving that fast? And as it moved up the ridge, lickety split, it then turned and started heading in our direction. And I thought, now what? The comms don't work. None of us can run that fast. What are we going to do? And it was that moment that I thought, man, fires are a monster. You can't stop them if they decide they're gonna come and get you. But that was the 80s. And now things are a bit different. I'm not saying they're better, they're just different. And so as a kid, I was barely, not even 18, standing in that moment like the gong show all around me. It was a hard thing to process. But I am privileged to have processed it because now I have a way better understanding than most Canadians on how fires kind of work. You can watch it on TV and think you've got it figured out. But until you see that monster frickin' ripping up the mountain towards you, that's a whole different understanding than the movie fire. So I'm going to retract my statement from the start of the show. I have played with more than just lighters. And I'm glad that I have a sort of a sense of things, but a lot of Canadians don't. A lot of North Americans don't. And so how best to educate the population without having to put them in some janky orange coveralls and go live in your filth for 21 days? How do you help people understand that fire is no joke?
So that's a great question, Ben. I'm going to come to you here in a second because I saw you just click off. Just wanted to hit these real quick. Winterstorm jumped in here earlier, said, "Good morning, everyone. Good to see you, buddy." And he asks, "What is a common mistake homeowners make that contribute to wildfires?" And to this point, and to Sean's point, there's another comment here that I want to get on both of these because he does add in, for wildfires, if the cost of equipment per firefighter is less than a city firefighter, why do we not have more people on standby to help? Training could be a tax break for the person, maybe. We were discussing this a little while ago in the conversation of national service, was having provincial emergency disaster relief teams, things like that you could work as like a reservist, that kind of stuff. But on both of those questions, what is the common mistake, or what do you think people need to know about wildfires that they don't? And then as well, what can we do to help, Ben?
Yeah, Sean, man, thank you for saying all that. You basically just described my 25-year career. We got radios that work good now, so that's good. But there's plenty of times where I've been dropped off in the middle of nowhere and just been like, okay, here we go. Yeah, and then the reality of, those first 2 days in the middle of nowhere, and the grime starts to build on your skin, and then you're just like kind of fall into being used to it, and then you just rinse and repeat that for 7, 8 months straight. So kind of get used to living in the filth. I was thinking, actually, you're standing on that hill with holding your axe, looking across at the fire, and I remember some of those moments. I've had a lot of those moments, countless, and also beyond recognizing the intensity of Mother Nature, also recognizing how beautiful it is at the same time to be standing in some of these really pristine, beautiful places in the world, and just like, wow, this is really special. Yeah, I mean, I've said this before on other podcasts. I talk about this a little bit, but wildland fire is one of the only natural disasters, maybe the only natural disaster, that humans actively try and control, manipulate. Every other natural disaster I couldn't even imagine trying to control a volcano or an earthquake or things of this nature, right? It's kind of impossible. And in some ways, controlling wildland fire is maybe potentially impossible to some degree. So to me, the way I like to look at this is it's about working with Mother Nature as a part of it. So it's what can we do to not influence it, but listen to what it's telling us, and working with it so that when an event happens, that we're not trying to forcefully fight Mother Nature, because you're going to lose every single time. The thing for like the homeowner or the public is, it's, at least in the United States, we don't have enough people right now to get the fuels management work done that needs to get done. And we need the public's help. We can, I work for the federal agency, the Forest Service, and we can, do the work on the federal land. There's state wildland firefighter agencies that can work on state land, but there's still so much checkerboard of just public, like private stuff going on. And we really need their help to get educated enough to do the work within their sphere of influence, which could just be their property. But there's still like the idea of it's still Mother Nature. So we can do as much work as we can. Like you were talking about, like the ember wash that happens is usually like the primary thing that spreads wildfire. And it could be as simple as, that falling on a leaf in your gutter. So it's about doing the simple things that you can do around your home, recognizing, how encroaching the brush or ladder fuels are to your house, spacing the types of vegetation that are around your house. Are they fire resistant, things of this nature? And also, like, if you're living in a community, like, what is your evacuation plan? Like, if you get called to, if something happens, how are you exiting this area? Because you can see very quickly down in Los Angeles that the fires that happened there, the fire was moving so fast that people were having to abandon their cars and run, to some degree. So it's also about, like, building these pre-planned, you know, escape routes, as we would call them, for when an incident happens, so that things are done in an orderly fashion. But there's still Mother Nature plays a part. When you have 100 mile an hour winds and they're blowing, there's not a firefighter on this planet that's going to be able to stop that. So it's also the reality of the situation too, is if you live in an area, specifically we'll say Los Angeles again, where, in the fall and sometimes in the winter months, you get something called Santa Ana winds that produce 100 mile an hour plus winds. That's a reality of the environment you chose to live in. So it's about being prepared for an event like that. And so the educational piece is really the best thing I could say to maybe answer that question. Is, like, it's really up to everybody to seek education on their own through these agencies, and then the agencies, responsibility to educate the communities that they're assigned to protect.
Yeah, this is that's a tough one. Evan, what do you got?
Yeah, I just want to echo all of Ben's comments. They totally apply north of the border to that imaginary line on the map, right? Mother Nature doesn't care about it. When it comes to what the public can do, I think that I talk about all the time, fire smart, fire wise. That's the vegetation management, that resiliency of your property, of your community that Ben was talking about. Almost every major urban interface fire I've been on where there's been loss of structures, those communities did tons of fire smart work at the community level, outside the community and on public lands. If the neighborhoods and the private property themselves don't keep their properties clean and don't have their properties fire smart, a lot of that community level fire smart is almost all for naught. With the way that with embers transfer and they move kilometers. For Jasper, for example, I was in Jasper. I rolled into Jasper the night that the community got hit by fire, and I spent the next week there. It was wild, right? And not the first time I've seen loss of that level in a community, but the fire behavior was insane. The fire itself may have, and they're looking into it now, created an actual tornado in front of it. Not just a fire whirl, but an actual tornado out of the pyrocumulonimbus cloud. And Environment Canada is trying to, ground truth that a little bit. But, like, just speaking about the ferocity of how these fires are burning in some of these fuel types with the warmer, drier weather we're seeing, there's a common misconception in the public, like, oh, put more air tankers on it. When fires are burning like that, we call them crown fires. They're burning up in the aerial fuels of the trees. I've watched the biggest air tankers that exist. Their entire load evaporate before it hits any fuel type. It doesn't work, right? Sometimes we try to use aerial ignition, like fire, to fight fire on the ground, to reduce fuels in front of it, to steer head fires away from communities and things like that. But those are Hail Mary things, and they create their own complexity, right? The best thing I think that the public can do is make sure their property is ready. And like Ben said, know what the plan is. A municipality, is going to pull the trigger and say it's time to leave. But you need to be ready to leave. Have a 72-hour bag ready to rock and roll during fire season for you and your family. Make sure you got enough stuff for at least 3 days, because it takes 3 days for those supports afterwards to kick in at reception centers and government level programs to start funding you for food and all kinds of stuff and finding you a place to stay. You might be on your own for 3 days, and that's actually the legislated expectation in Alberta, is that communities are responsible for getting you out, telling you when to leave, and then to look after you if you're out for more than 3 days. So 72-hour bags, being prepared, making sure your property is ready to go. we've seen a massive uptick, and I, in some cases, I understand why, on people refusing to leave under evacuation orders, right? And the complexity that adds on the first responders and the wildland firefighters that are trying to come in and do the best job they can is astronomical. We end up, instead of fighting fire, we end up saving lives, and then we see more loss in the community. We see fires get bigger and run away from us. We get caught up in what's right at the time, which is life safety is number one. But that takes valuable resources away from the jobs that we should be doing and trying to protect critical infrastructure so that community is viable afterwards, trying to save as many residential properties as possible so there's something for everybody to come back to after the fire goes through. And the training question, the training piece, I hear the public, I hear them, hey, we want to help, we want to help, we want to help. The tough reality is that we could have 200 people show up and train them to basic levels of wildland firefighting, but if they're not in that every day, we can't put them in the shit. My apologies for swearing, but we can't put them at the head fire. So we're moving them to areas of the fire that are calmer. They're doing mop up operations and things like that. And what we have to do is put trained, qualified firefighters with them to supervise them, to give them direction, and that's taken those people away from the hotspot places we need them. So I'm not saying that it's impossible. There's solutions and there's ways for that. And Alberta is really good. They have a wildfire reserve program that the public can join. You get basic levels of training, and then they'll call upon them in crazy fire seasons and put them into 8-man fire attack crews and send them all over the province doing stuff. But the spontaneous volunteers the day of the fire, we can't do anything safe with them. We don't have time to take people off the line to train them. We don't have the equipment to give them because we're strapped already. And they create a logistical and life safety issue for us. So getting out when you're told to leave is important. And trust me, incident management teams don't make those decisions lightly, right? And sometimes we wait too long to make those decisions to get people out of the way. But when it's time to go and you're being told to go, the best thing you can do is leave and do what you're told to get out of the way. And if you've done all the preparatory stuff before, like making sure your property is as hardened as possible, and you're making sure your insurance is in place, everything else will fall into place, even if the worst case scenario happens later, right?
When you were talking, it made me think of Teachable Sea. Actually, is when you have a medical emergency in the middle of a firefight. I'm sure Evan, right? Is first things first, win the firefight. Right, you can't do anything to help somebody if there's bullets coming down range, right? So it makes perfect sense that if you need to evacuate a town and you made that call, get the hell out of the way. Like, just get out of the way, let them do their work. Rob, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, lots. People should be looking at their insurance policies just to make sure that, and not just look at, like, because when you get a policy, you get like your declarations page, which has all your coverage on it, but then you have policy wordings, and that's actually your policy, right? So you have to look at how the wordings refer to your coverage, because certain things can minimize or eliminate coverage for certain other things, right? People need to have proper ALE coverage in case stuff happens. But, as a society, we're reactionary. We're not, we don't prepare properly, right? Because, the company that I'm with, they did the Fox Lake fire, right? They did the rebuild, and then it was affected again this past year, right? Because they did nothing, right? They're rebuilding and they're doing no preparations, like, cutting back the tree line, a certain distance from the housing, that kind of stuff. And yeah, like, I mean, people in general are typically, you don't see it, it doesn't affect you, right? And the thing is that, yeah, until that smoke comes rolling in or the fire's on your back doorstep, people are just, what they think of? My pictures. my pictures of my kids and that kind of stuff, and they're running around grabbing that. And if they'd have like a go bag or something, I mean, I have a plan in place. I have a go bag. I have radios in each one of our cars. Right, we have a meeting point outside of the city, out in the country. We know exactly if anything should happen, that's where we're going. Right, and you know, people think that you're paranoid living like that, but you're prepared. Right, and it sucks because I deal with the human component on the other side of this thing, right? And you sit there and you see these people cry, and the stuff that happens is horrible. And I don't just do property claims; I do a bunch of other stuff as well. But yeah, it's tough. And then it evolves into something where even on with Jasper, you get an entitlement end of things where the people, I have total loss files that I deal with, and then the evacuation losses, right, that their properties are okay. Sometimes they're the hardest people to deal with because they want to get paid for everything. They're just looking for money, right? And they got their homes, and the people I don't hear from are the people that lost everything, right? And the guy's just like living in a hotel. It's I get really cynical when when it comes to people and populations and that, because it's just people are very selfish. They're never prepared. They play the blame game all the time, and then you kind of got to kind of work through it. Right. And then they get mad that their insurance premiums go up, or that their house is affected the next year when a fire comes blowing through there because they did nothing.
That's the one of the biggest challenges, and one of the reasons we wanted this podcast to get set up. So I have a great comment from Winterstorm. He just jumped in here and was like, proper preparation requires people to think about horrible things which they don't like, so they ignore it to make it go away, which is exactly what you're talking about, Rob. This is just it's so poignant. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I do. I just want to I want to give some context to what Rob just said, actually to what everyone's saying. And so I think anyone who knows me would consider me a fairly squared away guy. They'd probably consider me as reasonably organized and capable of responding appropriately in a pretty quick fashion. That's what most of my friends know me as, I would say.
I would agree.
Yeah. So, in a pinch, I'm probably a good guy to know. So, back in the day, this is going back like 25 years ago, first house I bought when I got out of the military was in Calgary. And it was just a little bungalow, nothing fancy, that's for sure. And the house right next door to me, one morning, a guy comes home from his night shift. It's about 6 o'clock in the morning. And he's out on his balcony, which is on the opposite side of the house from me. He's having a little smoke. He throws his cigarette down on the balcony right next to the freaking propane tank, next to the barbecue. He goes to bed. I get up. I'm like, I'm in my kitchen, man. I'm just about to start making a coffee, and wham, my whole house shakes. I'm looking out my kitchen window, and I see my kitchen window do this. And of course, I instinctively get down and I'm grabbing a weapon that I don't have off of my belt, which I'm not wearing. And so as I'm trying to orient myself to the ground, I'm looking to my left flank, which is where I hear the noise from. And I'm trying to process, what the heck? So I run straight to the door, stick my head out the door, and thought, what made that freaking noise? And right away, I see flames crackling over the height of the building. And this building is, I can almost reach out and touch the building. It's a really narrow space between our two houses. So I thought, holy hell, that I don't know if that house blew up, but there's a freaking fire going off. So I turn around, I get back into my house, and I grab my go bag. And I go out the door, and I'm thinking, I'm busting out of here. Jump into my car, back it up right down the back alley at a safe distance. And I think, wow, I wonder what that was all about. And then I realize, oh my God, I left those photos. So now I'm running down the back alley straight into my house, trying to shield myself from the blazing fire that's kicking off like lickety split right next to my house. I get in, grab my nonsense, which I shouldn't have, turn around on my heel, run out of the house like even more shielding myself from the mega intense heat. It's now starting to blister the side of my house. I'm thinking, this is very uncool. Fortunately, my house was located within a half click of a firehouse. They showed up, lickety split, put it all out. It was all good to go. My house didn't burn down. But since that day, I've never stopped beating myself up to some degree for being a freaking slacker, man, for not being totally squared away, for not understanding how fast a fire can kick off and get out of control, even if you're freaking squared away. Like, that was a process that was 90 seconds. And from 0 to 90 seconds, as I was sprinting back down the alley to my car, I was like berating myself for not having all of the I's dotted and all of the T's crossed. There is no time to get organized when things are going that monstrous. And so you've got to have it all in place well beforehand. You've got to have pre-thought all of your, which door am I going to go out if this, then that? And I hadn't done that. I just considered myself as a squared away guy who could move lickety split and sort out the problem in the real time. But that's not how fires work. And so I'm using myself as a kind of an example of like not doing it as well as I could have to kind of wake people up and say, if you don't have it sorted out beforehand, there is no time to sort it out when it's happening.
This is it brings up an interesting thought. When we were in our last house, we had a second floor and the kids' rooms were up there. And so actually all of our bedrooms were upstairs. And we had an incident next door with one of our neighbors where we were really worried that dude was going to try and kick in our door. And we had to call the cops on him a number of times. Rob is the same dude that pulled a knife on me at one point. And we were quite worried about it. To that point, Amber and I started thinking, well, what if somebody does come in the house? Because my safes are downstairs. That's where all my rifles are. That's where I did keep my stuff. So for me to walk past somebody that broke into my house to go get something would be difficult. We did have a fire extinguisher in their house, but it was also on the main floor. So like, again, if there's a fire somewhere, am I going to run down to go get it and then try to come back up and help the kids? Well, no. So we created a plan and we got one of the extendable ladders that we could kick out the window and drop down and head directly down one of the sides of the houses, just based on the fact that we were worried about it. But prior to that, we had not even conceptualized that we would need to go out a window. And I think that's something that needs to be really hammered in, is that you have to conceptualize that these things not only could, but will. And then you can build a plan from there. I think that's it's absolutely crucial. Let's go around again. Ben, you got any other thoughts on anything?
Yeah, I mean, just to speak to that too, I think there's like even a more philosophical thought process behind this is like, you know, the one piece is like, if we're gonna live in rural areas where these things happen, then there just needs to be a level of awareness that there is a what if, and or just like, or when is it going to happen? So there's an awareness about that, you know, and then there's, you know, an individual's awareness of action too, you know, the nonchalant action of throwing a cigarette down on the ground and just expecting it wouldn't do anything. You know what I mean? After probably hundreds of thousands of times that's happened. Or, you know, noticing the chain dangling off of your trailer as you're towing it down the street and just going like, it'll be fine. So there's a lot of these like bringing intention into your just daily life to have an understanding that there's cause and effect to things that I do. And if you're living in a dry climate that is susceptible to wildland fire, then there needs to be just a little extra step. And it's funny because I remember as a kid in grade school, we would have, or maybe even younger than that, like maybe, I don't know, I guess it wasn't grade school, but like we would the teachers would ask us like, oh, what's your evacuation plan if your house was to catch on fire? And you'd have to draw out the story and what window you're going to exit and where are you going to meet your family and all this stuff. It's, those things are taught to us, at least house fires, as little children. And yet we're not doing this maybe fully when it comes to other big scenarios, like for a community and or just a wildfire and things of this nature. So a lot of it's simple. If there's just a little bit of more awareness about where you live, the possibilities of things that could happen, and building a cohesive plan so that if it does happen, you're prepared, is the right way to do it. And kind of to comment on some of the comments that were there, that is, of course, we don't want people to live in fear all the time. I don't want someone to take every step and just wonder where the boogeyman is, like, when is the boogeyman coming to get me? But at the end of the day, it doesn't need to get to that level. It just needs to have the awareness of the environment that you live in and how you participate in that environment, so that if something was to happen, you're just ready to move slowly through it and safely.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Say this on the mats, we say it on the range, we say it in a lot of places. But I got a question on that. Winter Storm just hit a comment that clicked in my head. I said, success can't exist without a plan, and a plan can't exist without preparation. Preparation can't happen without what if. And you guys had mentioned the evacuations on a number of occasions, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think the biggest thing people do wrong right off the bat, which I'm assuming is they don't have a plan. But then on top of that, what should they do? They don't have a plan. Worst case scenario, their house is going up in smoke. What do you do? Evan, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Yeah. I just going back to some of the other comments that'll feed into the answer to that question. Chances, awareness of the risk is really the piece, right? It's funny to hear folks talking about, home fire safety and home fire prevention. And if you think about that for a second, we've been having structure fires that, impact even large like conflagrations, the London fires in Rome, even thousands of years ago, where everybody understands that risk. I think that, there's things in your house that can burn, they can catch fire, got to have a home fire safety plan. And even that being the case, there's still a massive amount of the population that has terrible fire safety skills and has no home fire safety plan, right? So I think at the end of the day, and I'm not saying this to say that the common denominator is unintelligent by any means, but human nature is always gonna be a factor we got to fight with. And the factor that not everybody is going to think what if. Some people are incapable of going down the what if path, or they're just, in their own minds, they're busier with something else, or the different risk or the different threat. Maybe that's money problems, marital problems, all kinds of things. That's the risk today for them. So they're just not thinking about everything else, right? Until it's right in their face. Major wildland fires impacting communities is on the grand scale of things is a new thing. Right. There's been wildland fire on the landscape ever since there's been vegetation on the landscape. So long before humans were around. What's changed is us. We're building communities and we're building built infrastructure amongst these fuel types, and people haven't realized that comes with an element of risk, that a wildland fire could impact you and could impact your community. And it's something that we need to really start getting out there more and more and more on the education side of stuff, and because it's happening more and more often for whatever reason. And people can debate this till the end of the day. I'm sure climate is getting warmer. The climate is changing. We're living in a warmer, drier climate, even up here in Canada, right? Like people talk about, if you live in Ben said, if you live in a dry area, it's susceptible to wildfires. Northern Alberta is not a dry area. It gets dry at certain times of the year. We have an issue in Alberta called the spring dip. It's the start of spring every year. And because we have large homogeneous pine and spruce forests, because of our forestry practices that have taken place over a century, all of those conifer tree types, when the frost is still in the ground in the spring and all the fine fuels are dead, and we get the first warm, dry southeast winds, not dissimilar to their Santa Ana winds in California, these naturally caused and human caused wildfires kick off and they start running. And those spruce and pine trees are at their driest part of their life cycle. They're not taking up any moisture. The roots are still frozen, and these fuel types just rock. And it doesn't have to be super hot outside. We just have to have low humidity and winds, right? Because all the fuels are dead and they're all dry. And that's where we run into issues in Alberta. That season is crept into April last year. With the into season where they're at in Alberta this year, it's even earlier. It's looking like, the start of fire season for us could kick off as early as mid-April. And so we've gained a month here now, right? And there's only 12 of them in a year. At the end of the day, to get people start thinking about the what if is, if you live in a rural area or even in a large community that is up close to a bunch of wildland fuel, and I could list off a ton even here in Alberta, Hinton, Jasper, Canmore, Redwood Meadows, Rocky Mountain House, Nordic, keep going down south. There's tons of communities that are not rural areas, but could be majorly impacted by wildfire, just as Jasper did last summer. People need to start realizing that is the reality, and we have to live with that on the landscape. We're not stopping it. They are getting more complex. They're getting more intense every year. And if we're going to continue to build communities in these areas and build homes in these areas, we need to do something different. That's building homes more resilient. That's being aware of the risk. That's listening to evacuation orders. Talk about what do you do when you don't have a plan. If you don't have a plan, the best thing to do is to listen to the people making the plan. That incident management team that's coming in and says it's time to leave and this is your route you're taking and this is where you're going to get checked in, do what they tell you in the timelines they tell you, because those people are making the best decisions they can with the information they have at the time, and they've probably done some pre-planning and some exercises to try and figure this stuff out, right? Jasper had a very good evacuation plan that was ready to rock and roll, and they implemented that plan very quickly, and they had some really amazing information that went out from Parks Canada and the Jasper community itself. That public information piece is huge in community safety in these events, is a good communication plan that tells the public exactly what they need to know, but the public has to listen to it.
Yeah, that was one of the things when we bought the house we have right now is I was looking at the evacuation plan. How do I get out of the city? If worst case scenario, right? How do I get out of the city? Am I stuck on one particular road? Do I have to cross a particular bridge? Do I have little things like that people don't quite realize? In Jasper, especially, there's two ways in and out, right? And they're not big roads. So there's going to be traffic. There's going to be all these things that most people don't expect. And it's it's a tough one. Rob, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah. I think the biggest misconception, to Evan's point, is people think that because we have seasons that fires just go away in the winter, and they don't. There's fires burning all winter long, and then if we don't get the snow or the rains in the spring, all that deleterious material dries up pretty fast, and they'll pop out, and that's how these fires get started. So they never go away, and we just don't see the smoke, right? We don't see the smoke. It's not the media doesn't have its attention, but these moss bogs or whatever, the muskeg, the fires will get in there and it'll go underground, and it'll just sit there and it's just burning underground, and then all of a sudden, boop, it comes out, right? But yeah, people in general are just, you just have to look at all the worst case scenario. But we're living in a time right now that, nature's kind of fighting back, right? So, red deer specifically, that's like the largest hailstorm region in Canada, right? They get the most hailstorms. I used to live in Red Deer, and I remember walking outside and it was raining across the street and I was dry. Like, the jet stream going through there is weird. And that's why whenever we drive, you drive to Calgary, and I always say, okay, from Pinoka to about Olds, it's going to be crap, right? Like in the wintertime, you always expect something. You're going to hit a storm in the summer or just something wonky in the wintertime. Right. So you got to know your region, what kind of the weather patterns that kind of happen. But it's not just fire, it's everything that we have to think about, right? Mother Nature is a beast, and if you live on a high water table, water is the most destructive thing on the planet, right? Because it'll just go wherever it wants, and it'll take everything with it. Land, it breaks apart mountains, right? Like, I mean, it just does what it wants. But yeah, that's the kind of thing is people just have to kind of look at their situation. And even if you're not going to go to the extent of having like an escape plan or anything, at least get a bag together for your family, right? Just connect that way. But
Basics, right? The basics.
yeah,
You got to
absolutely.
get some food, some water, get yourself capable for a couple of days. Winter Storm jumped in here earlier with a comment that said, the worst thing the boogeyman can hear is, I was expecting you. And that is such a solid point. So appreciate it, buddy, because that is exactly what you need to be able to say is, I was expecting you. Ben, you got any thoughts on any of this?
No, I mean everything everybody's saying, what Evan was saying there too, I just agree with. I think if you don't have a plan, then you need to listen to the people with the plan. I think that's like a really solid piece of advice. Like I have so much sympathy and compassion for people who, a fire's coming and the risk of them losing everything that they have invested in their life being gone is, pulls on my heartstrings pretty good, and I understand how, to the best. I mean, I've been somebody who's been evacuated plenty of times. So, and I understand how that feels, to be up against that, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck and maybe you don't have insurance on your home and like all these different scenarios that someone could find themselves in. It's a really kind of scary place to find yourself. But also, when I promise you, when I am fighting fire in the wildland urban interface or anywhere, I'm doing everything I possibly can to contain and control the fire from causing more damage on the landscape and or affecting life and property. So, but when someone stays back at their home or is fumbling around trying to figure out how to leave, or all of these scenarios, and they impact my ability to do that, it just makes it a larger issue kind of take place. And the last thing I want to do is worry about someone who's refusing to leave their home, because that's like the ultimate thing. It's really hard for me to shift my mindset to control fire when there's somebody parked in their house refusing to leave. So, but everything everybody's saying is, I think is spot on. If you don't have a plan, then you need to listen to the folks that have a plan, for sure.
Yeah, this is such a. I love the fact you guys keep bringing up fuel types, because I've been wanting to say this for a while. And the fact that fire, it's alive. it will eat as it rolls, right? And it's something that Sean and I were talking about yesterday. I think it was. Down at my family's ranch, I was talking to my uncle one day, and I was looking around, and it was a really dry year, and the grasses this is right in the foothills, right? Rolling mountains and lots of big open pasture lands. There's cattle everywhere. And the grass was just brown, yellow everywhere, except for about an acre around my uncle's house. And it was super green, lush grass, beautifully done. And I asked him one day, and I was like, what is that? And he's like, it's a fire break. Make sure that all of this around me can actually burn. If it does, but my piece of land won't burn, because I got a good 150 meters of grass, good solid green grass that's not going to burn between any of my structures and that outside grass. And I think that was just such a beautiful point, and it's stuck in my mind for the rest of my life since then. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I got two or three. So on your point that you just made, Chance, it's an important point that you have to maintain a decent footprint around your house to hopefully slow that monster down. However, that's an academic consideration. Like, yeah, maybe I'll grow my lawn another kilometer. But that's like, it's academic. Like you're dreaming how big your lawn can be. What really, really puts the exclamation mark on how important it is to do these kind of things is go to an area where it's already happened. So from Rossland to Kelowna is about a 3.5 hour drive. And along the way, you drive through an area called Rock Creek. And out that way, there was a big old fire. And as you're driving through that area, it's nothing but black tree sticks and carnage, except for 3-4 houses that are just out in the middle of, the area that are almost immaculate because they had that big lawn footprint. And so you can academically consider how important it is, but what really reinforces it is when you go stand on the ground and look around and think, oh, now I see why it's important. Now it's tangible. Now it's real rather than academic. So what you see in your mind's eye is one thing, but standing on the dirty ground and looking at a live house versus a dead house, that's an entirely different thing. So if you have the opportunity when you're traveling through these areas, if you're traveling through Jasper, frickin' stop, grab a coffee, do a 360, look around, see what life looks like when a fire comes through. Because maybe you haven't seen it, take the opportunity to understand it. Second thing I'd like to say is listening to the guests, the burning question in my mind is, because you're all experienced, seasoned in the industry, you've faced this moment lots and lots of times, the question that I'm going to ask. My question is this: what is the number one thing that you see people do wrong? And that number one thing can be like instantly, it's the first thing they do wrong. Or it could be several days later, the number one thing that they do wrong. But just think for a moment, what is the thing that you have recognized over your years as a pattern that people just freaking get wrong?
That is a dang good question. And I'm going to just fill some air here real quick while I give you guys a chance to think. But I'm loving this. This is just a fantastic conversation so far. Evan, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably, it's a great question. It's a little loaded for me though, because there's kind of different phases of the incident where, they can do one thing wrong in preparing, they can do one thing wrong during evacuation, they can do one thing wrong later. So I'll start with preparing. I think being a wildland urban interface specialist, our jobs are to protect structures when wildfires enter communities or impinging on communities. And so when I see a house that lives versus a house that survives a fire front passage, the green lawn, that's part of it for sure. But I think the 1 meter immediately around the house being completely non-combustible, and while you're enacting your evacuation plan or listening to the people that have the plan, if you can take anything combustible off your deck, off your porch, if you can move stacks of wood away that you always put up right beside your house because it's nice and convenient to grab your firewood when it's stacked right beside your house. If you can stack that away from your property, like it's that 1.5 meters right around the structure I find that makes all the difference. And whether or not the house has combustible materials laid up against it or under the deck, or you got deck furniture that's got nice padded cushions sitting right on your deck, or you got a combustible welcome mat right up against your front door. Those are the things that the embers are going to go right past your nice green lawn, and they're going to fizzle right into that stuff, and they're going to light a fire right on your deck. They're going to light a fire right on your front porch. Right? They're going to light a fire in that stack of firewood, and then that's going to burn. It's going to burn your house down. That green lawn around your property is super important, especially for grass fires and what we call ground fires, right? Where it's not up in the canopy and it's just coming in along the ground fuels. It'll hit that change in fuel type. Fire behavior will significantly decrease, if not self-extinguish against the green grass, and you're good to go. And generally those ground fires aren't producing a ton of embers that are going super long distances because they're fine fuels. So the embers are really small. They extinguish in the air before they land on something. Or if they do, they burn out before they start a fire. But when you live in places where you have like conifer tree types, spruce, pine, fir, stuff like that, and these fires are coming through and they're climbing the trees and they're getting into the crown and those aerial fuel types, you can have firebrands, significant pieces of burning material travel kilometers. and they'll land on these pieces of combustible material right up against your house, and they will and you'll lose your house. Even if you had a non-combustible siding, non-combustible roof, and your lawn was green, you left the deck furniture out, and the deck furniture burned your deck down, and the deck burned your house down, right? So I think that immediate defensible space right around your house is super important to focus on. If nothing else, that 1.5 meters around your house and not having combustible stuff around your house, I have seen that time and time again be the only reason why a house is standing and why the one beside it isn't. Simple things. If you got a wooden fence that attaches to both sides of your house, open the 2 gates. Let the fence burn all the way up to the open gate and not burn your house down, right? Open the gates when you leave. That's a simple thing you can do, right? And then on the evacuation side or the response phase, I guess, I'll put a plug in for Ben and his team, is when people do stay behind and they try and fight fire, 100%, there's that self-felt responsibility, and rightfully so now, that we need to shift focus as responders on life safety and not on fire control, right? So we're dedicating resources to getting people out of the way, and then we're fighting with them. We're trying to convince them how dangerous it actually is. And I have a lot of compassion for them too, right? I know how hard that must be to leave everything behind and put your trust into people you don't even know, that might get sent somewhere else in 10 seconds to go do something more important. And you want to stay there and want to defend your property. But we see it lots in California. We've seen it in Alberta too, in BC, where these people stay back and fight, and they start using the residential water system, the municipal water system. And, when you have 2,000 people spraying their 3-gallon-a-minute hose onto green grass or onto it. I've watched videos in California where people are wetting the sidewalk and the asphalt, right? Like, they think they're doing the right thing, but it's doing nothing. But what it is doing on the back end is now there's a water system that was designed for normal municipal operations with a little safety factor for fighting the odd structure fire that comes in. We need all of that for these major wildland fires. We need it all. And when you get a couple thousand people flowing 3 gallons a minute through their garden hoses, tanks the water system, we start losing hydrant pressure. We can't fill fire trucks. We can't fight fire. And it's a huge issue. Now we have logistical complexities of trying to find a water source and trucking it in, pumping it over, all these things. We can't use the municipal fire hydrant system to fight these fires because it's being totally strapped by people just spraying water on their lawns, right? So that's another thing that I see as a bit of a critical failure when people aren't leaving, or you have communities where you're evacuating a portion of it, not everybody else. Everybody else starts strapping the water system because they think the best thing they can do that's helping is by making sure their lawn is wet right now. It's too late for that, right? But yeah, those are kind of my 2 answers to the question anyway.
Yeah, I remember, and this is a bit of a side trail here, but there was that shooting down in Vegas a couple of years back. And I remember hearing reports from the cops of people trying to run up and be like, I can help. Where do you want me to go? And like, leave. Just like, why are you even here? But there is a natural desire to want to, in those moment of crises, I think some people just want to be of service. They want to be of help. They want, what can I do? And I just want to hammer on the point, just get the hell out of the way. Get the hell out of the way. Ben, you got any thoughts?
Yeah. I think to answer the question just like straight direct, and then I have a little expansion on that, is I guess the thing that I feel people do wrong would be is letting our doubt influence our choices. And that's might be a much larger philosophical answer, but in this particular situation, it works also. I don't think this would ever happen to me, or like, you know what I mean? This kind of like doubt it could happen, it kind of influences our ability to not do anything. So there's that. And then maybe to expand on that too, is just like, it's not necessarily a wrong thing. It's a human nature thing. It's just lack of awareness. Are we asking the right questions? And I wrote these things down. I wrote, am I aware of the risk wherever you're at? Am I aware of the risk? How do I mitigate it? And have I mitigated it? If you can answer those 3 questions, then you're kind of navigating things in the right way. A value of mine is having a willingness to learn. And I think if people can find that willingness to learn instead of letting the doubt and the fear kind of control their life, like the person who's staying at their house, then they're more susceptible and more approachable at getting the appropriate information in particular to whatever situation they could find themselves in.
Love it. Rob, any thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm not going to speak to any of that because, well, the firefighting stuff, because Evan and Ben have kind of summed all that up perfectly. I'm just going to take more of like an insurance, rebuild. Okay, stuff's going to happen, and people think that preparing. Oh, I got insurance, and that's enough. But what people don't understand is that when your home burns, the assessment that the city gives you every year on your value of your home is what it's worth on the market. It's not what it's worth to rebuild. So the thing is that they use that to calculate your property taxes. So when you have a claim, we actually quantify what the house is to rebuild, square footage price, based on location, building materials, upgrades. Like if you put granite countertops in your house, well, you need more insurance, right? If you just changed out all the windows, you need more insurance, right? Everybody wants their city assessment low because nobody wants to pay property taxes, right? Like you want to keep that low, right? But in the grand scheme of things, if your house goes up, if it burns to the ground, do you have enough insurance to rebuild it? Like, kind, and quality, because that's what the insurance company is providing. Well, did you put a whole bunch of work into it and haven't let your insurance company know? Because I can tell you people do that, and it happens all the time, right? You know, like, I mean, uh, you don't even have to think about wildfires, right? You have an attached garage to your house and you park your car in there. Guess what? Electrical fires happen in cars all the time and they'll burn your house down, right? So, like, I mean, there's all this stuff, but your approach could be, I'm doing what needs to be done and I'm taken care of because, well, I got insurance and that's what insurance is for. The problem is that when I come to your door and say, "Hey, I'm here to help you deal with this claim, right? I'm gonna help you through this," and then I start looking at a policy, and then I have to tell you the bad news, right? Well, your insurance company's not going to pay for this. Well, I got insurance for that. No, you didn't. When did you look at your policy? Well, I don't. Nobody looks at their policy. Nobody reads that stuff, right? It's just like you tell your broker. And I'm telling you right now, brokers make mistakes. And I have claimants that that are my insureds that are actually suing brokerages right now because of that kind of stuff, right? So, again, it's to everybody's point is preparing, you know, and doing everything, like, be responsible. Would you sign if I put a contract in front of you, would you just sign it and trust me that, well, all the wording's great? No, you'd read the darn thing, right? Like, I mean, but people have a tendency of, well, here's your policy, and they throw it in a cupboard, right? Or a drawer, and, oh yeah, no, I'm covered for everything, right? And then they put you know, a a $5,000 deck on their home and new shingles on the roof, and then they do like a full renovation, and they never get their insurance you know updated, and then your $600,000 home is actually going to cost $750,000 to rebuild, and guess what? The insurance is only going to pay out to limits, right? And it's a I do my job and I like it because I get to deal with people and I'm helping them. I'm trying to get their coverage afforded. Insurance companies don't see it like that. They're looking at bottom line numbers, and it's like, well, this is the policy and there's no gray area to kind of move, right? Like, it'll be like you know it is what it is, and they come back, and then I got to tell the bad news to people, right? So that is the biggest thing, is just be prepared that way. Is if you think that all you're going to do is get insurance, at least take a look at it, review it every year, and make sure and get a a better survey or estimate for what your house is, right, to rebuild.
Yeah, I when I was doing the renovations on my last house, and when I do the renovations on this house as I go, I get everything inspected specifically so that I can get all the tags and all the tickets and all the things ticked off, so that if something does happen, which more likely it will, I'm covered. Because when we started looking for houses to buy, they were like, "Yeah, we made the basement's redone, but nothing's permitted," and I'm like, "No, don't want to be here." Just right off the bat, because I've seen how people build stuff, and I'm just not playing games with that. And it's interesting that you bring up the insurance part of it. And earlier, when you were saying something that, we've had structure fires since Rome, I can't remember who said that, but the original firefighters in Rome, it was a bit of a protection racket, right? They would wait for a fire to happen, and then they would show up with buckets and be like, "How much is your home worth?" And just sit there, and people would pay them whatever they possibly could just to try and get their houses to be put out. And there was some rumors that perhaps they might be starting fires just to get the insurance out of it. But I wanted to bring that up in the fact that you need to be covered. And if you're not covered, you should look into why you're not. One of the things my wife and I do is we have a fire safe for all our documents, so that, I know it's not going to cover every fire or whatever temperature it goes up to a certain amount, but at least we have some protection, so that we have our paperwork at the end of it all if the house does actually go up. Sean, you got any points to add?
Sure do. So one thing that I feel I got to say it right now before I forget, and it's in respect to, it's the Jasper fire. I got a buddy, Andrew, who I've done a bunch of 24-hour solo mountain bike races with. I used to coach him for about a decade, and he's a great dude, hard as nails. Like, he's legit a burly guy. He'll put up with all kinds of nonsense and be able to do the job. However, when the Jasper fire hit and they had to evacuate him and his girl, like, now you're on the road for hours, grinding down the road at super slow speeds, nose to tail, in all the smoke and all the terrible light and all of the go this way, go that way, turn around, go back, and when am I going to get to eat? We don't have water, yada, yada, yada. He can put up with all of that stuff. He's done it lots of times. But my buddy Andrew, even he felt it. And I say even he because I'm using him as an example of a dude who's pretty resilient, pretty burly, can put up with nonsense, can grind for days without sleep. And he found it super challenging. So, dialing that back to someone who isn't used to that kind of stuff, people get in the hurt locker 2, 3, 4 hours after this event, after the evacuation starts. People get like testy. People get chippy. People get scrappy. People are in the ditch like having a snooze. An evacuation is not like following the yellow umbrella down the road where someone's going to hold your hand and whisper sweet nothings into your ear. It can be a frickin' gong show. And so if you're not used to the gong show, if you like having your silk pillow and getting your 14 hours sleep a day, that's not how fires work. That's not how evacuations work. That's not how the plan works. Sometimes the plan is there is no plan. Turn around and go back into the smoke until someone tells you where to go next. That's the plan. And you have to be ready for that, not just physically with all the things in your car and the radios and the go bag. You have to be ready for it emotionally and mentally. That psychological aspect of, oh, I'm in the gong show. Most people aren't prepared for that. And even if they're semi-resilient, at some point, the emotions become, oh my goodness, my house doesn't exist anymore. And that has a corrosive aspect to it. All that to say, using my friend as the example, he was feeling it days later. And so get used to that idea that you are going to feel it in the moment and after the moment. And so I've laid all of that out. Now I'm going to toss it back to the panel. What are your thoughts on how best to manage these kind of after effects within the first 6 hours of an evacuation, we'll call it, right through to maybe a week afterwards? All three of you have seen the unfolding of these events and how it negatively impacts the psyche of humans. So what are your observations on that timeline unfolding? Maybe the big things that you really stand out as I've seen ... and then how to improve that situation for people. I know it's a big question, but it's whirring away on me.
A big question here on the collective? No, I would never have thought that was going to happen. Ben, you want to start us off? What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, that's a that's a podcast in and of itself right there. Thank you for asking that. I think it kind of comes down to, how do I best want to answer this? I'll kind of like make categories here. There's the public aspect to it, right? You're talking about your friend. Resiliency doesn't feel like resiliency when you're using it. It feels like stress. You're up against it, right? So it's and everybody's resiliency level is or way of displaying that really is built upon the experiences that individuals have had during their life. So there's the public aspect to it. You as a first responder, firefighter, hotshot, and finding myself in these places and these environments quite frequently, more frequently than I'd like to admit. It's really about understanding the impact that it's having on people's lives in real time and bringing a lot of empathy and compassion into it. It's not when these things are happening in these environments. I wish I could offer you guys and the listeners some perspective of how quite insane it can be in these environments when you have thousands, hundreds or thousands of homes burning down at once and it's just chaos. And you look somebody in the eyes and you're like, hey man, it's time to go. And they have to make the realization that they're getting ready to leave everything that they own behind. It's not about facing them and telling them, you have to bring some sort of level of compassion and understanding for their situation so they feel comfortable and they need to trust you. So there's the empathy aspect for the public in those things. And then and these situations happen too. You might be going to the grocery store, in between shifts to just pick up a couple supplies or some coffee or something for the next shift. And that parking lot might be full of people who have been evacuated. And so it's about understanding, the human element to the point where you can go to somebody and ask them how they're doing and bring some humanity into it. And I think that humanity piece is so important. And I feel like there's a lack of it sometimes. So for me, it's a lot of looking at the humanity piece for the public. And then there's just the other side too, is like there's a real impact that this is taking place on the firefighter in general. You're seeing these in a lot of ways. We're, at least I'll talk from my perspective. When I entered into the fire service, I thought being a wildland firefighter, specifically being a hotshot, this elite level firefighter, you're supposed to push all the junk down, and just like deal with it as a warrior, as whatever that meant to me as a young man, until you identify with this definition, and then you start to experience loss. You may experience a suicidal thing. You might lose somebody on the fire line. You might see massive communities just get burnt to the ground, or maybe a trail system that you love. It's like there's so much destruction, and you start to feel feelings that don't line up with that identity anymore. And so I see this constantly within firefighters. They're constantly struggling with the amount of loss, the amount of stress. You're not eating, you're not sleeping good, you're missing your family. There's a lot of effects that we're taking on to do this public work. And it has an effect. So how do I deal with that is as a supervisor, as someone who runs a hotshot crew, is I try and create an environment that allows people to express what they need to express without feeling guilt for it, so that we can process these things and then get back to work. And we run these things very gently so that the people aren't feeling judged, and so that they can really maintain and find some sort of authenticity within their life, so they can continue to serve the life that we're all a part of, and the communities that we all play in and all exist in and find ourselves in all of the time. But it's a process. I myself have been up against this before, as someone who's a survivor of a suicide attempt. You trial by fire, you finding yourself in the dark place and having mentors and people believe in you to say, hey man, like, it's okay to be here, and through this pain there's actually something way more resilient on the other end. And so it's a lot of it, how I deal with it is through my own personal lived experience, bringing empathy, compassion, and understanding into the situation, and then also providing a safe space for people to authentically express the things that they're dealing with, so that they can work through things and not feel guilty for them.
Yeah. You bring up empathy, and I think you bring up empathy, and it's such a great point in just the fact, not just from the first responders' point of view, from the public's point of view. Because for the public, they might see their community is on fire, and they see that next crew coming up and going to get coffee in the 7-Eleven and think like, shouldn't you be out there putting out the fire, right? And I just wanted to hammer on the point from the community's point of view, to have empathy for the people that are working the friggin' thing, right? They need to eat, they need to sleep, they need to rest and recover and get the things that they need to, so that they can fight the fire. So it's from a first responder's point of view, absolutely empathy for the people going through it. But from the people going through it, empathy for the people trying to help you. It's such a key thing from both sides.
Yeah, so
Even though-
there's the idea, the intellectual idea of have empathy, but then there's a whole freaking other level to it, and that is when you see the firefighters like walking into the 7-Eleven to get coffee, freaking go in there and buy them a round of coffee. Freaking buy them a coffee. It's not that expensive. So what? 8 guys, a coffee. Now you're down $15. Big deal. It's the best $15 you ever spent. Because now you're in the game. You're in the game of helping out your community. You're in the game of fighting the fire. But you're in the game of feeling good about doing something good for other humans. So, in my opinion, and I do this, I'm not going to say I do it on a regular basis, but I do this when I see a crew doing something rad for their community. I'll freaking go in and buy them whatever they're picking up. And it's not that I'm extremely wealthy and I can just do it like at the drop of a hat. Like, I feel it. My wallet feels it. But it's the right freaking thing to do.
Yeah. See, simple as a handshake, even. Just acknowledgement, it's such a great point. Rob, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, again, I'm going to take a different approach a bit, because just I come in after the fact, right, with all this stuff. So I get a lot of people venting on me. They yell and scream, and they're say they're frustrated, and I've seen some, or have tried to help people through some pretty bad stuff. But it's all, again, it's about finding what's going to work for you in kind of getting your connection back to your community, and don't play the victim card, because you have a community that's victimized by this event, right? And that's it. It's about getting, again, like everybody's saying, being empathetic, but to every facet of everything that's going on around you, right? Because there's so many layers of things that take place when something like this happens, that everybody has to kind of be on the same page, working towards the same goal, and realizing that everybody has frustrations. And it's funny, because people always apologize for venting on me, and I'm like, no, that's what I'm here for, right? Like, I mean, I got thick skin. I'm not going through this stuff. And believe me, if I was in your place, I'd probably be doing the same thing. But in my mind, I would be like, okay, Because I've seen, I'm dealing with people right now that as a result of the Jasper fire, they don't have anything. They lost everything. They left there with the clothes on their back. That's it, and the car that they were able to drive out of therein, and that's it, right? And trying to get these people to kind of come around and just think that your world's not ending, right? Like, I mean, you have insurance, you have this, you have that, but there's a process, and the biggest thing is that nothing happens quick enough for people, right? People think that insurance is going to come in and be the magic that solves the problem, right? And it's not. I always tell people, when I go to a claim and I meet you, I'm like, I set the expectation. Okay, I realize that this has all happened, but don't think that you're getting a check tomorrow, right? Like, I mean, I have claims that are over a year old, right? And they get bits of money here and there, but there's a process to the whole thing. And people get angry at their insurance companies because they may not necessarily know what their policy says, or they're not moving fast enough, and there's other circumstances in their lives that kind of take precedence over this, and it's just something that they're putting behind them to, okay, this is being taken care of by these people, and then it's not being taken care of quick enough. And it is, you have to have patience in everything that you're going through, and it sucks. I feel bad for people on a daily basis.
Yeah, this is a so I like the fact that you brought this up, and the fact that it does take time, as everything does. But there's so many things I'm learning from this, and I'm really glad that we're doing this, because this is just fantastic. Evan, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, gents. Yeah, time takes time, as Rob alluded to. Nothing happens fast after the fact when you're talking about recovery of a community, right? To Sean's question, how do you manage the chaos that ensues when you get pulled to say it's time to go evacuate? That hammer drops, and it's time to go somewhere. That's a tough one for sure, and I think it's gonna, as Ben said, relate to everybody's different levels of resilience based on what they've been through in their lives. And then even then, you could be the hardest person on the planet when it comes to getting in gunfights in some distant country, but when your house burns down and your community is being lost and your kids' pictures are being burnt and everything you saved up for is gone, you break down. Yeah, that's totally valid. And the compassion for people when we're doing that, I think something I want to kind of shed some light on is that we're in some interesting times. Somebody said earlier that Mother Nature's starting to fight back. Yeah. And the other thing that's complex about the situation right now is there is a massive lack of trust in government at all levels, right? Nationally, provincially, state, municipally, there's a lack of trust in government right now. Pendulum has swung all the way over to one side at the same time that Mother Nature's starting to fight back. So, the folks that are making the decisions to evacuate communities, and the folks that are out there responding, whether they're police, EMS, fire, public works, private industry, whatever it is, that are responding to these major cataclysms, wildfires, hurricanes, hail events, floods, tornadoes. They do have compassion for you, and they're usually members of your community, and they're usually people just like you, right? And they do have your best interests in the backs of their minds. But we got to make tough decisions, right? Life safety is number one. Critical infrastructure for the community, so it can actually be a functioning community, and that can be critical social, economic infrastructure. We got communities all over the place where if the mill burns down, might as well not move back because there's no jobs to work there, right? There's a certain order of things that take place where in these moments that impact and weigh heavily on decision makers, on the first responders themselves, right? We get into situations all the time where not only are you telling the person, hey man, it's time to go. Sometimes you're walking up as a leader on these events and you're telling the firefighters, hey, it's time to go. We can't be here anymore, right? If we're still here, we're going to kill firefighters. And that's tough, right? You walk away from, now you've got this, this weight on your shoulders that, oh, maybe we could have stayed and we could have done something. But yeah, it's hard all around. And I think that the most that people can do in these situations when they're being told to evacuate is follow the plan. If you don't have one, listen to those that have the plan. That'll give you a little bit of purpose. It'll give you a little bit of certainty maybe in the moment to get through the chaos right now. There are supports available for you, right? Municipalities are responsible for looking after you after that 72-hour window. They're going to have a reception center set up somewhere. They're going to have a partner community that is, got their emergency social services team stood up to, figure out if you need dog food for your pets you left with, figure out if you need a box of diapers for your baby. They're going to put you up in a hotel somewhere. They're going to give you some Red Cross money and some food tickets to go to certain restaurants that have been set up all across the community to feed you for breakfast, lunch, and supper. Like, communities have some pretty solid emergency social services plans, and those things exist. I think the problem comes into the lack of trust in government, right? Is that well, that's my municipality, or that's the government X, or the province B, or the state Y, and they're telling me I got to leave and I got to go to this place, and then people, they don't check into the registration place, and then they sit there and they get mad because they say, well, they're not supporting me at all. They're not paying for my food, and I'm paying for a hotel, and I haven't got my $500 Visa card yet because I didn't check in and nobody knows where I am. If you go to where the supports are, there's a lot of things there to help you, and they'll help you through that. There's mental health supports, critical incident stress management, there's so many things that you can lean on that your community and your other communities that are around you, put the government BS aside, right? At the end of the day, a catastrophe has happened, and it sucks, and it's going to suck for a while. Time takes time, but there are systems in place that can help you through these tough times. You just got to access them, and you have to have some faith in the system that we have your best interests in mind.
Yeah, this is, and I'm sure we could probably continue talking on this for the next 6-7 hours. I just want to make sure that we're aware of the time. We're getting pretty close to 2 hours, and I just want to touch on some of the comments on the Instagram side because there's some really good ones. And then I have a final question / final thoughts for you guys. This starts at the beginning, and some of them are just absolutely fantastic. It's like Dan Cameron jumped in here, just recently completed a lot of fire smart training and looking at wildfires with a whole new and terrifying eye. This is one of the things I noticed also with first aid when people start doing it, is they start to realize, holy geez, are we like we can die really easily, and we can burn really easily. Like, all these things happen once you actually look at it. P6, proper preparation prevents piss poor performance, 100%. Jenny Melhalf jumped in here, says the best thing you can do is get out. Biggest thing, don't be a bigger part of the problem by staying. Just like a structure, get it out of the way. And then also continues, your freezer is a great document safe for those that don't have a fire safe. But as Rob, I can't remember who's pointed out earlier, but don't put it with food. If it's in there with food and it's there for a while, you're not going to want to get those documents anyway. And then Little Woodworks jumped in here and said, what if scenarios are great for that extra bump to get the camping stove or portable battery you've been eyeing? If you can actually sit there and look at it and go, well, what is the worst that happens? We do this with time appreciation, right? You need to be here at a certain time. Well, it takes me 15 minutes to get there, so I need to leave. That there's traffic, there's things, and you work your way back to a point where, okay, I need to leave here. So if you go from the worst case scenario, my entire house burnt down, what do I need? What are the things you need? And start listing them off and making sure that they're prepped and ready to go. So I just want to say thank you guys, because this has just been freaking outstanding. My last question, and we'll use it as kind of a final thought here as well, is if you could guarantee that someone comes out of this show with one thing stuck in their head, one thing that they could do better prepared, or have something ready, or paperwork wise, what is the one thing you would want someone to take away from this conversation? Let's start with Evan. What do you think?
One thing take away from this whole conversation, educate yourself would be mine. Read a book, watch the podcast, educate yourself on where you live and the risks that are associated with the environment you live in. Right, Rob said it well. Fires are one small piece in the topic we decided to dissect here today, but there are so many things that can happen to you that are totally out of your control. That is Mother Nature at her finest. Educate yourself on where you live and educate yourself on the risks. And that's what I would say is the one thing I wish somebody would take out of this conversation.
Bam. I love it. Rob, what about yourself?
To Evan's point, do all that and then put a plan together, right? Because that you educate yourself, you put a plan together, and it minimizes the bad things that can happen on the back end, right? That's it. Because you need to prepare, right? You don't have to live in a bubble, but we always say, like in insurance, you have the obligation to mitigate your loss, right? So why don't you do that for your life, right? Like if you're mitigating, the what ifs, isn't that's proper planning, right?
Love it. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm feeling the same thing. I think it's about awareness. It's about educating yourself. It's once you've done that, then you got to ask yourself, have I mitigated the risk? Have I done the work necessary to build that plan?
Bam, nice and easy. Sean, you got any final thoughts or points you want to ask or get across?
I do. So my thought is this, that obviously the guests don't need to educate themselves in how to deal with these matters. Who does need to educate themselves is the standard issue citizen. And so I'd like to say this to any citizen in Canada or the US, that if some of this stuff is new to you, or if some of it is puzzling to you, there's an easy workaround for it. Just hop in your car, drive to the nearest volunteer fire station, or figure out in your community when the volunteer firefighters get together, and head on over and thank them. Maybe take a round of coffees, or just get to know your volunteers, or get to know your primary firefighters in your region. Just even lean against the wall and talk to them for a few minutes and thank them for their service, but also try to get a better understanding of what their lives are all about as they service their community. And I think you'll find two things out of that. One is that if ever you have a major event in your area, things tend to go a whole lot better if you recognize the person who's about to save your house or save your life. There's a connection, a more human connection. Thanks for buying me that coffee. I'm here to save your house kind of routine. The second piece is that in making that common human connection, you're also learning about the trials and tribulations of what it means to be in this industry. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that it's a hard job. What you do have to do is get around it and understand it a little bit deeper than it's just a hard job. So that's my challenge, is to anyone out there, if you don't know where your nearest firehouse is, go frickin' figure it out.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add on top of that, other than the fact that Evan mentioned earlier, the community, right? If you are a member of the community, if you're engaged in your community and something bad happens to someone in that community, they can then lean on that community. If it's the entire community, they can lean on another community. And like, we need, as a society, we need to start leaning on our community a little bit more so that we can all support each other, rather than expecting someone from somewhere else to just run in, save everything, and then run out. We don't actually have superheroes in this world. We have people, and they try to do superhero jobs. Don't get me wrong, but they're people, and they're doing their best they can to help as best as they can. So I just wanted to really hammer that point home. And man, as we all continue to learn about this, It helps build our understanding, which allows us to grow every day. So with that, we'll see you next week. Chimo.
Chimo.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see y'all next time.